Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. Hi there. I hope you're having fun. I hope you are learning from each other and sharing. That's the whole purpose of this conference. And we have more to share for you because we have a very interesting speaker come up here to talk to you right now. We're trying to keep the schedule, so I'll just keep it very short. So what we have for you is Dr. Stephen Wallace, and he is the professor in the Department of Geosciences, Director of Field Operations, and Curator at the Gray Fossil Site and Museum. And so he has got a very interesting talk for all of you. So please welcome Dr. Stephen Wallace.
Alrighty, well, I'll try to keep this, simple, but at the same time fun, and try to put in as much information as I can without boring you to death. But one of the things that I like to do is start off with a little bit of a joke, just because, I feel like it makes me feel better, and it usually makes other people feel better too. But as I talk about this fossil locality, a couple things I want you to keep in mind is this is literally right down the road. This is only, 15 minutes down the road. It's only about 1.5 miles off the interstate, so it's in a really, really nice location in terms of, easy access. We're not that far from East Tennessee State University, which is just in Johnson City. So it's a really nice, sort of convenient locality. And so I get harassed a lot by my colleagues because I get to just drive up to my fossil site, and we have an air-conditioned building next to it. But that's not the joke. The joke is one of the big things from the site that we have is actually a fossil red panda. And I'll show you some pictures of it a little bit later, and I'll talk to you about it a little bit later. But when we first discovered this was way back in 2003, I think, when I had finally recognized what some of the teeth were. I was working on a paper, and I found out that the Knoxville Zoo has red pandas. And so I contacted them, and I said, hey, you guys have red pandas? I think we have a fossil red panda. And of course, you get this silence on the other end of the phone because they think I'm crazy. And I finally convinced Sarah Glass, who is their curator of special exhibits there at the zoo, that I was serious. And she said, well, I'll tell you what, we have a workshop that we do every 2 years on how to care for living red pandas. Why don't you come to that workshop and you can talk to all the other keepers about your fossil red panda? And when I showed up, I am fairly certain that all she told these people was some guy from the hills of East Tennessee thinks he found a fossil red panda. And when I walked in the door, I could see it on their face. They looked at me and they went, and there he is. So it was a fun, introduction. I mean, they did kind of give me that look, but it ended up turning into a really cool relationship. And we actually have, I do a lot of work with the Knoxville Zoo. If you're not familiar with them, and if you have a little extra time while you're here, visit them. They are the most successful breeders of red pandas in the world, actually. So that's why they do that workshop. And so I've been able to work with them a lot with living red pandas as well as the fossils at our site. Anyway, without boring you too much with this title, the basic thing to keep in mind with this site is that when we call it a Lagerstatten, all we're saying is that it's a really rich fossil locality. It doesn't just have vertebrates, it doesn't just have invertebrates or just plants, it has all of them. So it is a complete ecosystem. And the reason we call it a refugium is because when we look at our site compared to other sites that are the same age, ours is really different. When I talk about the age of this site and when I talk about the things that we have, it's just very different than other similar age localities. So the basic gist of it is, in terms of the background, we're basically located in the very northeast corner of Tennessee. I can get to Canada faster than I can get to Memphis. I know, it's pretty ridiculous. And it's funny how many people don't realize that Tennessee continues past Knoxville. And so, we really are way up in the corner. But essentially, the site was discovered during a road construction project. And I really shouldn't say construction, it was an alteration. There was a small little feeder road. Again, you don't have to worry about staring at the picture too much. There's a little feeder road here attaching to Highway 75. So basically, there was a T intersection. and it went over a hill before the intersection. So people would round that hill, they'd run the stop sign, there were accidents. So they were carving through the hillside, and that's when they found the fossil site. It's actually tucked in this little hill. And one of the first things they noticed was just how dark the clay was. This picture isn't just dark from, the lighting. It really is a dark, organic, rich clay. And, I'm not originally from this area, but even I recognize, everything is usually orange. You can take that joke any way you want. But I know, I had to sneak that in. But anyway, the local contractors, the construction workers, they weren't used to seeing black clay. They were used to seeing orange clay. And so right away they knew they had to come and look at this. And they had to realize, they had to decide, how big is it? Can we even put a road on it? What's it made of? And so they came out and they did a series of cores. And this is when they realized that it wasn't just a little veneer of black clay. It's well over 130 feet thick. And it covers 4 or 5 acres. It's a huge pocket of organic, rich black clay. And of course, while they were poking around in it, they realized that there were also fossils in it. It's loaded full of fossils. So, right away they recognized that, this probably isn't a suitable place to put a road. It's full of fossils. We need to rethink our whole strategy. And so fortunately, this is when they brought in, sort of the bigwigs. The governor visited, the president of ETSU visited, the president of UT visited. Everybody visited the site, tried to decide what they were going to do with it. Now, as far as why is it here, basically the way to think about it is it's a sinkhole. And if you're familiar with sinkholes, all you have to have is limestone and water, and you're going to get caves. And if you have caves, if a cave gets close to the surface, in some rare instances, it can actually collapse and create a big hole. Now, most of the time when that happens, you just have a cool cave entrance. You just walk into the cave. But in certain rare situations, when it collapses like that, it'll plug itself and become a big bowl. And so you essentially have a pond that forms from a collapsed sinkhole. And the geologist in me, because all my degrees are technically in geology, my specialty is just vertebrate paleontology, I can't help but, look down at Florida where they love to build subdivisions around these sinkholes, and think this is probably not the best idea, but, they look nice. So the way to think of this is and this is something I always forget to say, is don't think of this as a catastrophe or some sort of catastrophic event. Think of it as it's just a pond, and it's just the day-to-day activities around that pond that allow these animals to accumulate. The geologist of you would tell you every single pond has a lifespan. Every pond goes through, its beginning when it's just a basin, and then as it fills in with sediment, it eventually becomes a high spot, and eventually it's not a pond or a lake anymore. And in most cases, that's going to take 10, 15,000 years. Well, if only one animal dies a year, that's 10 or 15,000 animals that are piled in this deposit. So don't think of it as this collapsed and all these animals fell in. Think of it as basically when it filled with water, they were just living there. And this is something that we see, when we look at our fossils. The most common things that we find, even though I'm going to show you the cool big things, if you ask the people digging in the field, if you ask me from, all my years of digging out there, what do we find most frequently? Frogs, salamanders, turtles, fish. That's what we find a lot of. Alligators. But everybody wants to hear about the cool mammals. That's what they want to hear about. They want to hear about our saber-toothed cat, or like I said, our fossil red panda. So basically, just sort of view it as, a pond setting. The difference is the age. When we looked at our animals early on, we had sort of a ballpark age of between 4.5 and 7 million years ago. Since that time, we've refined it a little further. We've done a few other dates and a few other mechanisms for dating. And right now, I would probably say, if someone were to corner me and say, how old do you think it is? It's right about 5 million. So that may sound old to you. You may think 5 million years, that's a long time ago. Well, a couple of cool facts is that really 5 million years ago to a geologist is young. The limestone in this area, the limestone around this building, is between 300 and 500 million years old. So this is really a young pocket in the middle of that really old limestone. But for me as a paleontologist, I like it because it's just old enough for the things to be different, but not really different. When we find a saber-toothed cat, it's still a cat. When we find a big, quote, elephant, it's an elephant. We recognize these things, but they're different. And so for me, it's a lot of fun. So one way to visualize it is, again, visualize this pond setting, sort of similar to what you might see, in eastern Tennessee today, but with different players. Things like our little red panda hiding up here in the trees, or things like peccaries or tapirs running around, different types of animals. In this picture, I've actually got a couple of camels. A lot of people don't think about camels in North America, but they were once very common in North America. And in fact, if you want to think about camels in the, quote, Americas, think of llamas and alpacas. Those are American camels. And at Gray, we have both kinds. We get what we call lamine camels and true camelids, so we get both. So again, it's different players. It would look like, if you were to get your time machine and go back in time, it would look very similar to Tennessee today, except you'd have different players. Now, fortunately, like I said, the former governor, Don Sundquist, recognized the importance of the site. They decided to preserve the site. If you want a good laugh, there's me looking like I'm 12. I constantly feel like I just got here. I'm starting my 23rd year here basically at the Gray Fossil Site and at East Tennessee State University. So I've been here a while. And I was very fortunate. I was hired right out of school just to work on this project. And the first thing that I went after was money. Because, paleontology is it's a science of labor. It's not just a fossil sitting on a shelf. You have to get it out of the ground first. You have to prepare it first. You have to catalog it, preserve it first, before you ever get to study it. And so we needed a lot more than just, here's a hole in the ground, go dig. And fortunately, the former governor had the same opinion. We actually got a really large grant. It was an $8 million grant, but it was basically an 80% reimbursement grant. So to get the 8, I had to spend 10. So what we built was a fully functional museum, and it's right on the site. So those of you going on the field trip this afternoon, you're going to this building. You'll get to go out to the museum. And you'll see the classic displays with lots of cool skeletons, but what you will notice is the displays aren't that huge. When you actually go into the building, what you'll notice is our prep lab is huge. Our collection space is huge. I mean, basically, when I got this grant, I got the whole, well, you're a paleontologist, you know how to design a museum, right? And I was like, no, I have no idea. So, I mean, I'm going to admit I got a lot of help. I got a lot of opinions, and every single time, 99% of the time, what I heard was, our collection space is too small, our lab is too small. So I made them big. So when people come to visit, they're jealous of my prep lab, and they're jealous of our collection space, all with room to grow. Now, early on, a lot of our excavations were fairly small. Here we're actually going after, this is a partially articulated tapir. I know it just looks like a bunch of sticks laying here, but that's honestly what it looks like when you're digging. The fossils are almost the same color as the clay. They're very dark, and so it is tough. But once you get them out and clean them, they lighten up just a little bit, and they're usually almost all about a chocolate brown when they're dry. Today, our excavations are usually a little larger. This picture I really like. I know it's probably hard for people to see, but you'll notice that a handful of those people have sidearms on. This was actually the FBI. They wanted to come out and dig with us. And so this was, I want to say this, I think this was just a couple of years ago, but they came out, they dug with us, they wanted to get some experience. And that's why, if you notice on the left side of the picture, they're all wearing kind of the same outfits because they came out in official capacity. But it helped. They got to learn some new techniques, and we got to get some people to dig. Because that's what it's about. It's about moving sediment. Now, just to give you an example of some of the cool things we found, again, I could go through our list. Our list is huge. In terms of the number of species, I think we're up to about 215 species now from Gray of plants and animals. That also includes a few insects and a few other invertebrates. But to show you some of the fun highlights, this is one of our really nice turtles. This one was named by a graduate student recently as a new species of painted turtle. We've got alligator from the site. This little alligator down here that looks like Superman flying through the air. I should put a little cape on him. It would make it look better. Actually was one of our first alligators and one of our most complete. We actually have all the ribs and gastralia. I just didn't put him in the photograph because it would have made it really busy. But what's funny is he's only about 5 feet long. Our alligator is a little smaller than the living species of alligator, but it looks like it's the same genus. Now this one, everybody should be able to figure out what this is, right? This pile of gibberish. The reason I snuck this one in is I wanted to highlight that because this is clay, because this was a lake deposit or pond and filled with clay, our bones crush. Almost all of our bones have been crushed in some way, but fortunately, they haven't been deformed. So if you're good at puzzles, if you like to piece things together, you can get them back together as long as we protect them before they go into the lab. And the analogy that I like to tell people is, if you think about it, it's a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle without an original picture. But like a jigsaw puzzle, it only goes together one way. And so a lot of our best preparators don't know anything about anatomy. They're just really good with puzzles. So anyway, this might not look like anything to you, but I recognized it in the field. This is actually a, without going into the details, you probably can't even see this little pad here. This is where the patella sits. This is a femur. And I recognized the kind of animal that it was as soon as I saw that little flat pad. And so I was like, okay, we have to do a jacket. And what a jacket is you wrap the specimen in plaster, basically. We dig around it, we make it a little pedestal, we wrap it in plaster, and then we dig under it a little bit. And then we put more plaster, and then we dig under a little more. And what it allows you to do is basically roll the thing over and then bring it into the lab as a little package. And now you can work on bits and pieces and work your way through it and put it back together. And so this is what it looked like when they opened the jacket, and this is what it looked like when they got it put together. And so we have a nice complete femur, and it's a giant ground sloth. But what I always like to tell people, though, which is kind of funny, is it's a small giant ground sloth. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but to give you a context, basically this ground sloth was probably about 5 feet tall. So pretty good sized giant ground sloth, but not like the really big ones. And if you saw the movie Ice Age and you saw those sloths running around, you probably have an idea of what you think a giant ground sloth should look like. But there's actually a genus called Eurymetherium, and it was originally found only in the Caribbean, and then a few years back they found some in Florida. And the Florida Museum of Natural History has one mounted. If you go to the museum in Gainesville, it's 18 feet tall. That's a giant ground sloth. This is a small giant ground sloth. So it's kind of a fun little thing. One of the weird trends, and you'll see it as I show you some more highlights, is that a lot of the stuff from Gray, we get big versions and little versions. We get a little bit of both, so it's a lot of fun. Now, here's a couple of students working on a jacket. This was actually a rhino skull, just like with the camels. We used to have rhinos here in North America. In fact, they were common all over North America until about 4.5 million years ago. That's when we originally got our minimum age, was from the fact that we had rhinos. And what they're jacketing there is the skull. And I know it doesn't look like a whole lot, but this is what it looked like when they opened it up. And so you actually have basically a whole smashed skull. You can see the teeth, you can see the zygomatic arch, the nasals, the jaw, even the tusks. And like I said, it's a bear to put these back together, but fortunately, because they haven't been deformed, they do go back together. This is actually an articulated pes, which is your foot. So bones put together. And all I mean by articulated is, if you think about it, if I were to, this is kind of a weird analogy, but you'll realize, or maybe you've already realized, I have a really twisted sense of humor. If I were to drop dead right here on the stage and people just left me here and I rotted away, my bones would basically stay in place. They'd more or less be where they're supposed to be. That's all we mean by articulated. When we find our skeletons, they're often articulated. They haven't been scavenged on. They haven't washed through a stream. They're just laying like they died. And so this is literally an articulated foot of one of our rhinos. This is our most complete rhino. We found this one in 2004. It took us 9 weeks to dig it out. This one to this day drives me crazy. That one little square right there. We found every bone except for one toe bone. And so yeah, it drives me crazy, but it's the way it is. The fun thing with this animal is we got to do some reconstructions. This particular rhino, Teleoceras, is normally considered to be a hippo analog. And so all of our early reconstructions, even this early artwork, which is on display, I know it's a little dark, but they're basically built like a hippo. One of the things that I noticed early on is ours has slightly longer legs than I would expect. And so basically what we were looking at is something that, yes, it's Teleoceras. Again, don't worry about the name, but it's this pot-bellied rhino, but it has long legs. And so we actually named this, a graduate student and I named this as a new species a few years ago. It's Teleoceras apisoma, and the name literally means the long-legged, short-legged rhino. I know, the site's full of these funny things. We've got several individuals. Here's a couple of finished skulls. These are prepped out skulls. You'll notice that they have big lower tusks. The males of our rhino have massive lower tusks that are about the size of a banana, and they're sharpened by upper tusks, and they fight with them like a hippo. And it's interesting. We've got several complete skeletons now. I think we're working on our fourth right now. They've all been males. So far, we haven't found a female yet, but it'll turn up. We do have some horse, but this is where I get to put on my professor hat and give you a little quick lesson on horses. Most of horse evolution actually took place in North America. At the very end of the Ice Age, they went extinct. So most localities that are the same age as us have lots and lots of horses. They're usually expected to have horses. Having said that, the grasslands were spreading at that time, and so horses were really diversifying in North America. Our site is a heavily forested ecosystem. That's what our site preserves. And so that's where the term refugium comes from. When we refer to gray as a refugium, is that the forested animals stayed at our locality while the grasslands were spreading elsewhere. And so our horse is actually really rare at gray. We only have a few teeth, a few bones. It's super rare. And it's a three-toed horse. So it's not even, basically what you would consider a modern horse. So when you think of gray, think of a forested ecosystem, a pond sitting in the middle of the forest, and this horse was probably just, one that wandered in, coming from someplace much more open. I do also have to highlight that when you think of North American horses, think of zebra. When you actually look at the characters of North American horses, they're more closely related to zebrine horses, so that's why usually you see these reconstructions have stripes. This was actually an illustration that Karen Carr did for me, and she never finished it. She did all the illustrations at the museum, and we were trying to sneak this one in at the end, and we ran out of money, but that's the way it works. So I've got the half-finished one. It's still good enough for me. Now, horses are what most localities are known for that are this age. What we're known for are tapirs. And, if you're not familiar with tapirs, I'll show you a picture here in a second. This is a set of articulated legs of a tapir. It was kind of funny. Again, I got to sneak in stories once in a while. When you're actually excavating in the field, you can't help it. Things get nicknames. It just happens. And this particular tapir was actually under that rhino skull that I showed you earlier. And when we found the front legs, we took them out. And then we finished that rhino skull jacket, and then we found the hind legs of this tapir, and we took those out. And all we were left with was this straight spine that had a pelvis at one end and a skull at the other end. And the students joked around that the pelvis looked like a snake, and so it became the snaper. And it just happens. To this day, the specimen is still the snaper. It's actually specimen 3519, but if I say snaper, everybody knows what I'm talking about. But tapirs are by far our most common animal. If you've never seen a tapir before, there are 3 species that live in Central America and South America, and there's a species that lives in Asia. This is Baird's tapir. I think I took this picture at the Nashville Zoo. They actually have a female. This is Juju. She's had several offspring since I've been there. I'll show you some pictures of them here in a second. But the big thing to notice is that's Richard Holbert there on the left. He's looking at a bunch of skulls, and all the dark specimens that you see are tapir skulls. We have more tapir skulls from our fossil site than the Smithsonian has of modern tapir skulls. Gray, one of our few bragging rights, is the largest fossil tapir site on Earth. And really, it makes sense, though, because today, tapirs love the rainforest, and they love water. When the rainforest floods, they stay there. They're semi-aquatic. So if you have a pond in the middle of the forest, while the grasslands are spreading everywhere else, the tapirs were here. They were probably our most common, mammal. And it's not that they're drowning, they're just living there. There's so many of them there, you're gonna get a lot. Oh, and I should highlight standard paleontologist attire there that Richard's wearing. He's from Florida, so he always has, shorts on and sneakers. If you'll notice me, this is about as dressed up as I get. I'm wearing Carhartts and steel-toed boots. It's just part of the job. And these are just some examples of some of the really nice skulls that we have from gray. And again, these are tapirs. This is actually a juvenile that we just recently put together. And I know it's hard to see scale, but you're looking at something that's about the size of a really small cantaloupe. I mean, really tiny. And that's the neat thing, is we don't just have adults at gray. We have everything from fetal material. We've actually found pregnant females all the way up through geriatric adults. So not only is it a lot of tapirs, it's a nice sample of tapirs. And when you look at the distribution of the ages, there's no bias. There's no bias towards young or old, something that would imply they were being trapped there. It's just day-to-day activities around the watering hole. Sooner or later, individuals are going to die. So when you go there, you'll get to see our mounted skeletons. Hard to really say a whole lot other than they're tapirs, so they're cool. I have a special place in my heart for tapirs. We do have a neat illustration or neat mount of an alligator jumping out at our tapers when you go to visit. I will highlight that the alligator we have mounted is a little big for Gray, but they wanted this dramatic scene of this alligator jumping out. And at the time we put it together, the only really complete alligator we had was that 5-footer I showed you earlier. And I kind of joked around with the designers that if you had that 5-foot alligator jumping out at these tapers in real life, they would just turn around and stomp on it. So we want something a little bigger. Now, one thing I do want to highlight is that our tapers are actually small. Living tapers are fairly large. The Baird's taper that they have at Nashville, they can average about 500 pounds. The Malayan taper can average 600 or 700 pounds. Ours are probably closer to about 250 pounds. They're small. It's a dwarf taper. And that's even as adults. Now, the cool thing is because, Nashville's fairly close. Again, I've tried to work with them. I've tried to get good pictures of some of these animals. This is actually Tybalt. This was one of Juju's first babies while I was around, and so I got to interact with it some. These are pictures of them actually, the keepers out there in the enclosure interacting with them. They wouldn't let me get out there. They didn't want me to get stomped on, but I did get to feed them a few times and do some other fun things. I do want to highlight that the babies are adorable. They're camouflaged. This is Cusco. And in fact, when I went to visit Cusco when he was still young, I think he was 2 months old and he weighed 70 pounds. So they get pretty big pretty fast. But you can see, absolutely adorable. Notice the little trunk. I know, so sweet. And I got to sneak these in, right? You got to hear the ooh, ah. And at least I did get to feed them. So at least I got to interact with them a little bit. I think they were trying to figure out if my beard was a snout. That's all right. So needless to say, when we did our reconstructions, when you see our artist illustrations, you'll see things that look like Baird's taper because that's what we've worked most closely with. And coincidentally, when you do the actual characters and look at a character analysis, ours is most closely related to the living Baird's taper than it is to the other 3 species. Now, some of the other cool animals that we have, I at least want to highlight. We have a Eurasian badger from Gray. It was originally only known from a few teeth. When I described this back in 2004, I named it as a new species, but I recognized that it was closer to the Eurasian badger than it was to the American badger. Since that time, we've actually found multiple skulls. Of course, the one that everybody wants to hear about is our panda. When we first described the panda, all we had was a single tooth. And I always like to tell everybody that, when I published on this, I named not only a new species, but a new genus based on this tooth. It was like, yeah, I'm confident this is panda. But, I'm not going to lie and say that as we found more material, I didn't kind of go, whew. I mean, it had a distinctive character without going to the boring details. It has an inflated and isolated metacondyal, and it's on the upper first molar, and that's the character I needed. And the only reason I gave you that little gross detail was not because I want you to remember it, but what I want you to realize is that the Discovery Channel gives you this misnomer that we can take any little scrap of bone and tell you this huge story. The reality of it is, most of the time, it is going to go into a drawer labeled bone shard. I mean, that's all it's going to say. You have to have the right characters. And just like most of you have probably met somebody that could go into a junkyard and they could pick up a carburetor and say, this is from a 1974 Ford Mustang. Well, how do they know that? Well, first they have to know it's a carburetor. First they have to know it's Ford. First they have to go through those different characters, and they've learned the characters through experience. Fossils are the same way, but I got to have the right pieces. If it's just, a fragment of bone, if it's just part of a long bone, I may not be able to say anything. But if you get me teeth, I'm much more likely to be able to say something. And if you get the right teeth, I can really give you a good story. Now, just like with a lot of the other animals, yes, we found a tooth first. Later, we found a jaw. Eventually, we started finding skulls. Since that time now, we have 2 fairly complete skeletons. We have a female that is about 98% complete and a male that's about 75% complete. And just to give you sort of an example of scale, here I've got limb bones of our fossil, or the dark ones, and of course the white one is a living red panda. Well, that one's not living, but sorry. Again, I have a sick sense of humor. Think about it. I work with dead things all the time. I got to have a twisted sense of humor. But the thing to notice is that the proportions are different. The female's humerus is actually a little shorter than the modern one. but the femur is longer, and so the proportions are different. So we started recognizing right away that there were different proportions to the animal. We also noticed that there was sexual dimorphism, which is not something you see in living red pandas. These are actually my twin boys. They're kind of spoiled when it comes to, they take this for granted that they've got to feed red pandas, and which, if you want a fun joke, they are identical twins, and I named them Martin and Fisher. And it's Martin as in the pine marten, and the Fisher, so they're my weasels. And they know it, and Martin will tell you all the time, that's Martin with an E. Anyway, but they've got to do a lot of weird things. They've got to feed a lot of cool animals. But I put them in there because really when you look at living red pandas, they are not sexually dimorphic. They basically, males and females look the same. They're very hard to tell apart, but our fossils do appear to be different. And these are the skulls of our male and female, and they are quite a bit different in size. And to give you an example, the male, well, let me back up, the female is about twice the size of a living red panda. The male is about 3 times the size. So pretty good size animals. Now, again, because Knoxville, because they're successful breeders, I've gotten to work with them a lot. If any of you have seen the U-Haul driving around with the panda on the side, that is actually a photograph that I took at Knoxville, and then they made it look like artwork. And that U-Haul with the panda on the side, if you look at it close, it's the Great Fossil Site. They're advertising our fossil site. And so we've got to do a lot of fun things with them. And I'm not going to lie. Every year I go to the workshop, and every year I talk to them about fossil red pandas, but I'm there to hold the real red pandas. I can't help it. And, it's just, again, I love them to death, and so I can't help myself. So every chance I get, I love to go work with the living. It's the best way to understand the fossil is to really understand the modern. I mean, if you're gonna try to say what different is, you have to know what normal is. And that's every step of the process. It's not just looking at the living ones, it's also dissecting the dead ones. This is Mauricio Anton sitting there with me. He's a paleo artist from Spain. We had him visit. We dissected several pandas. We took him to the zoo so he could interact with pandas. And then he took our male skeleton and he put it together in the computer. We scanned all the bones and he put it together. And then he muscled it out and started doing sketches. And so this is the most accurate reconstruction of our fossil red panda. And the first thing that you'll notice is it looks very cat-like. It's built like a little puma, basically. And that's the way I would describe it to people, is it is built like a puma. I mean, it has a more normal-sized head. You don't think about it, but when you look at a living red panda, they have a giant head because it's covered with all that musculature they need to chew bamboo. Bamboo is a terrible food. It has very low, caloric content. It's tough. It's terrible. Of course, the question you ask is, why do you eat it? Why do pandas eat bamboo? Because nobody else does. I mean, that's actually an evolutionary solution that some animals come up with. There's a whole lot of it, and no one else eats it. So, it's the giant panda and the red panda both taking advantage of it. Now, this illustration actually went into a paper that I just published. I try to publish a lot. It's one of the things we do, in academia. We have to publish. But pandas are kind of my thing, but I'm trying to drift more towards tapirs too. A couple other cool things just to highlight that you'll get to see when you're out there. We've got a new proboscidean. A proboscidean is basically, it's elephants and their relatives. I technically should say proboscidean because this is not technically an elephant, but if I say elephant, you know what I'm talking about. So we'll just say it's an elephant, move on. But basically, that's one of the upper tusks. We hit a skeleton a few years back in 2015, and it took us, we're still digging in the same spot, still finding bits and pieces. But the upper tusks are between 10 and 12 feet long, and then it actually has lower tusks that are shorter, and I'll show you those in a second. But to give you an idea of scale, the white bone in this picture is the ulna, one of your forearm bones, from a young African elephant. And the one below, obviously, is ours. So we are looking at an incredibly massive animal. So while some of our animals are small at great, some of them are huge. This is actually a jacket around a crushed skull. Notice the jaws at the bottom still exposed. Here I am showing one of the front hands to my boys. The white hand that I'm holding is actually an African elephant, and then the dark one is our fossil. So when you go out there and look at these things, it looks like you're looking at dinosaur bones. They are ridiculous. To give you an idea of scale, Sean here, the guy in red, he's about 6'4". And so these are massive bones. And from what we can tell, they're essentially, this animal is the height of a mammoth, but it's built like a rhino. So this is going to be probably in the top 10 biggest mammals ever. It's incredible. And we found almost the entire skeleton. These are the jaws when we were first working on them. This is what the jaws look like now, which is crazy because, I mean, if you notice, there's a long extension at the front and then tusks that stick out. So this is a 4-tusked elephant. Now, unfortunately, the skull was really crushed, and we're still working on the skull. But this is what it looks like so far. And what you'll notice are the teeth are still good, the sockets for the tusks are still good, but most of the top of the skull was really crushed, so we're still working on it. In terms of our mass estimates, they're all over the place, but again, a really large animal. So think of it as, that's little me there for scale. It's not me. A really, really large proboscidean. So while we have dwarf tapirs, while we have, I didn't even mention it, we have a short-faced bear at the site that is really tiny. We have things like this that are really huge. So it's a really neat mix. I threw this slide in just to show you that we actually have teeth of other individuals. So we are finding more than just that one skeleton. We're also getting things like peccaries. This was a graduate student of mine that published a few years back on the peccaries that we had from Gray. We even have a wolverine, lots and lots of really cool mammals. But it's not just the big things, it's also the little things. We do a lot of water screening, and almost all the water screening that we do is labor intensive, but it's because you have to be gentle. You inherently want to really shake that stuff, but you'll destroy those little fossils. And so we do a variety of techniques. We've even tried using peroxide more recently to break up the clay, but it's how you get things like this. And when you look at those, what I really want you to notice is the scale bar. That's 5 millimeters. So those bones would sit on your fingernail. When you look at this series of jaws, those would sit on your fingernail. They're tiny. We do get little things. We get bats, we get shrews, we get rodents, but you only get it through the screening. So it's this science of labor. So lots of small stuff. And this is where I, of course, have to put in the little pitch. We screen all the sediment from Gray. We're probably the only fossil locality in the world that screens everything. But if you're going to screen everything, somebody has to pick through all that stuff. And we have an army of volunteers, and a lot of them are retired people, and they just hang out. It's a social setting. They just hang out, and they pick through the sediment. And they chit-chat, and they get excited about what they find. They show us, and of course, they feed off my excitement. If I get excited, they get excited. But what you see on the wall back there, those are like wanted posters of things we want them to find. But they do a great job. And it really is. It's a science of labor. So at any given time you go out there, you often see a lot of people picking, processing fossils, and working in the lab. Now, do keep in mind, though, that, obviously that was my pitch for volunteers. Do keep in mind that, when I talked about tapirs earlier and I said that tapirs love water, tapirs do everything in water. They love to feed in water, they breed in water, they even poop in water. So keep in mind when you're out there screening, think about what you're screening. I know, I want to get a t-shirt that has that on there. To give you a personal experience when it comes to this, that shot that I showed you where I was feeding the tapirs vegetables at Nashville, I'm sorry, they had it in an enclosure in the back because they were going to X-ray Cusco. And it was a concrete floor, but in the corner was this tiny little tub full of water. And Juju, the mom, walked over, climbed completely in that tub, all 4 of her legs, and pooped in it, and then stepped back out. That's just, they love water. So again, when you think about our site having so many tapirs, it's really just because we were a pond, we were a forested area, while the grasslands were spreading. And so they were here, they loved it. And, got to end on a poop joke, so with that, does anybody have any questions? Sure, go ahead.
Labor intensity-wise, is there a way to automate that screening process?
We have tried. If you didn't hear me asked about automating the screening process, we have tried. And almost everything that we've tried is just too violent. It breaks up the fossils. And we've actually got an engineering department on campus, and they've come up with a few little, sort of trial things, sort of proof of concept, but we just haven't got anything that works well. But if you have an idea, I'm I have open ears because it is our biggest backlog. And what I didn't tell you was that, we produce bags of sediment when we dig, and I think our backlog right now is just under 7,000 bags of sediment. And they're bags that basically have an entire 5-gallon bucket full of sediment in them. So, yeah, we've got a backlog. I mean, we're finally to the point where we're screening more than we dig, but it's going to take us a few years to catch up.
Are your elephant leg fossils related to mastodons?
Basically, if you were to do sort of a family tree of proboscideans, mastodons are actually an offshoot. They're not really related to like living elephants, and ours is definitely related to a mastodon. In fact, ours is probably a transitional form. When we look at the morphology of the teeth, they look just like a mastodon, but the body's different. And we've always wondered where mastodons came from, and this might actually represent the first mastodon. So if you go out there, they'll refer to it as the mastodon. I mean, it probably is one of the earliest mastodons.
The reason why the skeletons are found together, is it because they fell into the pond? Why were the
It's just if you think of a bowl that's filling in with sediment, as the animals die, one of the things that really helps your chances of becoming a fossil is getting buried fast. And if they're getting buried before they're scavenged, before they move around too much, then we're going to find them as articulated skeletons, and that's clearly what's happening. This basin filled in quickly, but it's not a trap. They're just living and dying in the pond, because again, mostly what we find are articulated skeletons, and they seem to be concentrated along the edges.
Can we make sure we repeat the question because it's not coming through?
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Anybody else back there? Yeah, if you didn't hear it, she was asking about the rhino that was missing the toe. Is there any way to know if it was missing in life? Yeah, usually you can tell if an animal is missing something in life, if it's due to disease, pathology of some kind, you can tell. And this looks perfectly healthy. If you wanted my speculation, I think a turtle ran off with it or something. And I actually mean that seriously. Probably we have snapping turtle from the site, and in fact, even though I brag about our tapers, we have at least 7 different kinds of turtle from the site, including 2 different kinds of tortoise, several kinds of box turtle. We have snapping turtle. We have sliders. We have painted turtle. We even have the little mud turtles. But my guess is you probably had a snapping turtle or something picking at it, and it only has to roll away a meter, and we're going to miss it when we're digging. And it'll probably turn up someday, but the chances of us associating it with that skeleton are pretty slim. But yes, you can tell if an animal is missing something in life, and we have, in our modern collection, we found things like that. Something I didn't talk about is if you're going to really understand the fossils, you have to understand the modern, which means you have to have a modern skeletal collection. And I've been building it ever since I got here to ETSU because we didn't have anything, and now we have about 15,000 skeletons in our collection of animals from all over the world, and we get roadkill all the time. And we've collected bears before that were missing a leg, and you can see the bone is healed, it is actually, the skin is reacted, everything's reacted, and so you can tell that it was missing in life. But the main thing for me as a paleontologist is the bone does show it. So yeah, this is clearly it's probably there, it probably just slid away a little bit. I'll find it one of these days. Yep.
Since you mentioned poo, do you find preserved copper legs?
What's really funny with that is, yes, we find these little blobs of concentrated organic material when we're digging that probably represent coprolites. And we've got a few people that have taken some as samples, but they haven't really published on them just yet. So eventually we'll figure out, hopefully, who the culprit was. But we do find within the sort of abdominal cavity of tapirs, we often find nuts and seeds and things that they ate. But the most interesting thing that we found is we've been sending seeds to a plant person. Every time when we're picking, we find seeds and we send them to them. And she recently let us know that she's been finding caterpillar poo in the seeds that's fossilized. And we didn't know what they were. They just, they're these odd little blobs, but she was able to distinguish that it's caterpillar poop that's preserved, which is cool. Of all things to find. We thought they were seeds. Any other questions on this? And I realized I was looking too much this way. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. That was really cool. That was really interesting. I hope you enjoyed that presentation. So a few things to mention. Thank you. It was really good. And if you're not doing the actual, if you're not one of those 40 people doing that field trip, well, it's there. You can visit it while you're in this area. Do have a few thank yous and some quick announcements. All right, so I want to do some thank yous because what's coming up are the buses to go to the field trips. And so we want to thank Astrotech for the weekend, for the Wednesday trips. Astrotech. Also, Clark Planetarium. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Astrotech is the buses to the trips. Clark is the field trips. Thank you, Clark. Coming up earlier, the Wednesday break in the vendor hall earlier today was from Creative Planet. Thank you. Breakfast. I hope you like that breakfast with that country ham from Benton's, which is in Tennessee. That was from Ash Enterprises. And our lunch today, I hope you enjoyed that. That is from Goto. Thank you. So thank you very much for that. So quick announcements. So we'll be boarding buses at 1:45. I know that's very close. That's why we kind of interrupted. They've been parking in different areas, so I'm not exactly sure where they're going to be parking, but look for the big school buses, and we're going to try to get you on the right bus to the right field trip. We'll work that out as to find out which one is which. Also, you're probably wondering, where's dessert? It's out there. So they set it up out there because they wanted to keep it warm. Cobbler. Oh. Okay, I knew I was going to get that reaction. I'm going to stop talking so you can get cobbled. Have some cobbler. Get ready for your field trip. Enjoy the outdoors. We'll see you later tonight. Thank you.